it's Lo.
Hey, I'm Hayleigh.
And we are Wrestling Winedown. On this episode, we're going to tell you a little bit more about us, who's sitting behind the mic.
We'll be discussing what we like about wrestling, what's kept us interested for so long, and what we hope to do with this podcast. So grab your glass of wine.
We're going in for the 3 count. We wanted to thank you guys for listening to our last podcast episode where we covered WrestleMania 35, but now we want to introduce you to us. So I am Lori Lo Esteen. I go by Lo. I am 22 years old, and I was born and raised in Las Vegas. I am currently a senior. I'm graduating soon from the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, majoring in journalism and media studies.
I'm Hayleigh. I'm also a student at UNLV, also studying journalism. That's how we met. And then we found that we have a love for wrestling.
A common love. So I started watching wrestling when I was around 9 or 10. Crazy story. I was at my grandmother's house, and I was upstairs in one of her bedrooms, and I remember I was flicking through the channels, and I came across Monday Night Raw on the Spanish channel. It was like a Sunday at like 2 or 3 p.m., and I'm kind of like, what is this? And I keep watching. Mind you, I don't speak Spanish, but I was so intrigued by what I was seeing, and I was like, wow, that was cool. So then the next week I watched it, and then the next week I watched it. And, you know, I hadn't told, like, my mom or my grandma or anything that I liked wrestling. I was kind of scared because I felt like it was such a masculine sport that they kind of be like, well, why do you like that? You know, kind of like, what the hell is going on?
So did you kind of watch it on the down low?
I watched it on the down low. And I eventually told my mom, and I vividly remember being like, Mom, I like wrestling. And she was kind of like, okay, Ann. Like, like, it wasn't a big deal to her. And I was like, why did I freak out for this song? Now, mind you, I'm like 9 or 10, so of course I'm freaking out. I have it on our website. You can find the link on our Instagram where I talk more about, you know, how I got into wrestling. But I remember I used to go to the live events here with my mom. My mom doesn't like wrestling. My mom had no idea what wrestling was. She just knew I liked it, so she went with me. My mom was just...
She was there for a
she
good
was.
time.
I remember one time we went to Friday Night SmackDown at the Thomas and Mack, and she had gotten tickets, and I was so excited to go. I think that was one of my first events that I went to, and they messed up the tickets, so they screwed around with the ring, and they up the seating. But it was just so cool, and I had my little posters that I made, and I still had my loud shrieking scream, and, you know, it was just a fun time. And then my older cousin DeAndre, I found out was into wrestling as well, so then I started going to wrestling events with him, and it's been a great outlet. It's been nice to see all of the storylines. So it's kind of like a family thing for us. I get a lot of questions still from like, why do you like wrestling? Or what intrigues you about wrestling? And I guess I can kind of pair that with why I've liked wrestling for this long. There's just something about it. You watch it and you see the storylines, and, you know, people will come at you and say, well, you know, it's fake. Did I ask you? You know, that's all I want to say. It's so exciting, and it's kind of like a reality show. You're watching people in these storylines, and they progress every week, and it's just such a cool experience. So I had stopped watching wrestling, I think, at like 13 to like 17. I just wasn't interested in the storylines anymore, and honestly, I wanted to be a professional wrestler so bad. I remember telling my mom that, and she was like, like, okay. And my grandma was like, please don't get hurt in the ring. I'm like, okay, whatever. I thought I was fine. 13-year-old me thought I was fine. So anyways, I stopped watching wrestling for a while, and then somehow, someway, I just started watching it again. And then I kind of fell off again, and I started watching again, and now I just watch it. You know, I'll have it on when I'm at home. But yeah, I mean, it's great to see people that I watched growing up either retiring or still in the ring, and then you see new people that are just as talented or even more talented busting their ass for WWE.
So I have not been watching for nearly as long as Lo.
I feel like an old person.
So I started watching probably about 1.5 to 2 years ago, and it was kind of the same deal. My sister and I were just flipping through channels one night. It was a Monday night, and we came across WWE. And we've always heard about it, but we've never really watched it. Because, like you said, like, I always believed it was a man's sport, which, very wrong.
Hell yeah.
So we watched it that night. We were so into it, we didn't know who anyone was. But we were like cheering along. We were like, the commentators are so funny. Like the drama of it is what like brought us in. And so the next night we watched SmackDown.
I'm glad you watched it in English. I didn't have that luxury.
Yes, we watched it in English. And I remember my mom, she was sitting at her computer behind us, and she was like, "You guys are so loud. What is this?" And so she'll watch it with us from time to time. But like when me and my sister watch it, we just scream the entire time. Like we were so into it. And we caught up on like who everyone was pretty fast.
Right.
Because the storylines, like you need to know the background for most of them. And so that's how I got into WWE. But what keeps me interested is I love the drama behind it. I love the storylines. I love the character interaction. Every time there's a conflict, they make it so interesting. Like they make it different every week. Like they switch up the storylines from time to time, and then the pay-per-views, that's when everything goes down.
Right.
So that's what's kept me interested. But let's talk about how we figured out that we were both into it. Do you remember this? Okay,
I'm sorry, barely.
Okay, I feel like we're an old married couple.
You remember?
I remember.
Okay, tell me then.
So I tweeted something about how I love WWE. And
oh my God, I do remember.
And then you responded. You were like, "You watch?" And that's what you said. You watch? And I was like, "Yeah, don't judge me." And you were like, "No, I watch too." That's really when we became friends, I think.
Well, actually, we became friends before that because I had to interview you for a project. But you didn't watch wrestling at that point. Right. I wasn't really watching it.
I didn't know anyone who watched wrestling when I first started watching it. So, like you, I was kind of like embarrassed to like talk about it.
Well, I feel like there's this taboo feeling or taboo emotion around women watching wrestling. Mm-hmm. And especially when I was young and starting watching it, it was definitely there. When you would go to the live events, you would barely see women. It would be older white guys. Mm-hmm. Sorry. I mean, no, it would be older men. Older men that, had watched wrestling since the 80s. Their dads used to bring them to the live events, and now they're like 30, 40 years old with their kids there. But you would never see little girls. And for a long time, I was just kind of like, damn, like, is this just weird? And then when I started watching wrestling again, a couple years ago, I had started using Twitter and seeing, the interactions for WWE on there. And now I follow so many women that are just so into wrestling and they're so proud about it. They don't hide anything about it. And I honestly wish that I would have had that when I was younger. I mean, I know I was 9 and I definitely shouldn't have been on Twitter, but I'm just saying like that positive community, because now, you get on Twitter and some girl that lives in Connecticut or something could be talking about WWE, and you'll tweet her and then she wants to talk to you about it. And I feel like a lot of people aren't open about that, like with other interests.
Yeah.
Like
women's wrestling has come a long way since you started watching.
Yeah.
I mean, even since I started watching just that short time ago, like we were talking about in our last episode, how WrestleMania, the main event, was women, and that's it's never been that before.
Like I mentioned, when I first started watching, the gimmicks were crazy. The matches were short. I remember
they could do a lot more back then.
Oh, honey, no, they couldn't. Kind of and kind of not.
Watching?
Okay, so back in the day, like before I started watching, there was a lot of bras and panty matches, short matches. Like the women were so sexualized that men watched. That would be like men's breaks from watching the big men, wrestle. Like that would be like their, oh, she's so hot. When I first started watching, the gimmicks were still kind of like that, but they weren't as bad. The one that I can think of off the top of my head, which kind of makes me laugh now, but there was this girl named Kelly, and she was a 19-year-old girl. She was the youngest girl on the roster. She was an exhibitionist. So she took her clothes off every week on ECW, and then she had this dance group called Extreme Expose with Hayleigh L, who was a Diva Search winner, and Brooke, who was just some random girl that they got. And they ended up dancing all the time and whatever. They barely had matches. Kelly went on to win a Divas Championship. She's long gone now. And then Hayleigh won. She was a women's champion. She's long gone. And then Brooke went off to another company and won a championship. But these women were being so sexualized, and, being like 9 or 10, I didn't really realize it.
Yeah.
And now I look back and I'm like, what the hell was I watching? Like,
Right.
how did this fly?
Well, now it doesn't. Now women are respected on WWE.
I agree. I think they have a little bit more respect now, but you definitely sometimes still see little stuff. Like, there was a segment a couple weeks ago where I think it was Finn Balor and Alexa Bliss, and
Oh,
yes,
yes.
and she was
That
like,
was uncomfortable.
she was like, if you show me yours, I'll show you mine. And I'm like, what?
And then
like,
they cut out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was inappropriate. Just little stuff here and there, but it's definitely not where it was 10 years ago. Definitely not. Thank God.
So, since coming out and talking about WWE, I've met a lot of people who are into it.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, like I didn't know anyone before, but
Right.
after like tweeting about it, retweeting stuff from them, I've met a lot of people, or people who I already knew. They were like, hey, I love WWE too.
Mm-hmm. I have met a lot of people. Like I said, I've met a lot of people on Twitter. I guess now with this podcast, I've been a little bit more open about wrestling on like my personal pages and stuff. Like I'll post stuff every once in a while, but I'm not like every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and every 2 weeks on a Sunday talking about wrestling. Only, a couple people before I had this podcast knew that I really liked wrestling. And then I started tweeting more about it, and now people know, like, I've actually had 3 people ask me if I'm a wrestler, which I'm kind of like, a 10-year-old me would be so shook. She'd be like, hell yeah, I am.
Mm-hmm.
But no, I'm just a fangirl. So let's talk a little bit more about what we want the listeners to get out of our podcast. I had mentioned on my post for our countdown that I really want women to feel like this is their place to listen and like they feel like they belong. And I 100% stand by that because, like I said, growing up, I didn't have that. It was kind of like it was a men's sport, or women who watched WWE were seen as like weirdos, like, why are you watching that?
We want this to be a place for everyone to come and feel
Right.
comfortable, listen, and engage with us.
We do want men as well. I'm not saying that this is just like a women's
Right.
podcast, but the men need to be respectful of the women and the women need to be respectful of the men.
Exactly, and that's
Right.
what we hope for. But we're going to release episodes every single week.
Yes.
We're going to cover Raw, SmackDown, NXT, 205 Live, and all of
the
the
pay-per-views.
pay-per-views.
We might throw a little bit of gossip in there and the rumors online and our match predictions, and even like some stuff from the other companies that, tend to come up when we're on Twitter or whatever. But
Yeah, lots of events come to Las Vegas,
Yep.
and we want to cover those.
Yep.
We want to meet the wrestlers. We want to engage.
we have Double or Nothing coming to town May 25th.
Mhm.
with the whole StarCast weekend. I've never been to anything like that. I'm super excited to go. There are so many wrestlers that are coming to town. It's literally like a baby WrestleMania, but
Yeah.
it's a different promotion.
Yeah.
I feel like WWE would be like, how dare you say a little WrestleMania? But it is, you have this long 3-day process with signings, fan events, and wrestling. And every time I think of like a wrestling event like that, I think of WrestleMania and SummerSlam, of course. But there's no other event that gets people together that like the same thing for that long. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah, I agree.
Why don't we take our listeners through how we kind of started brainstorming around wrestling Winedown?
So Lori and I used to actually work together, and we would spend our lunches together. And that's when we would like mainly talk about wrestling.
Right.
Because we go to school together, we have some of the same classes, but we don't.
She can't get rid of me.
Yes,
She
we're
tried.
stuck. We're stuck together. But we would just like brainstorm. We were like, what would happen if we started a wrestling podcast? And I remember Lori was on her lunch and she like ran into my office and she was like, I came up with an idea for a name. Do you remember that?
Yes.
You were just like so excited. You were like, you couldn't even text it to me. You had to like run down the stairs and you were like, wrestling, wind down, wine, wrestling, let's go.
So a little bit of background on me. When it comes to podcasting and audio and stuff like that, I actually had a radio show before. Long live the lowdown. We will be back sooner rather than later. I did a radio show every week and I loved it. And it was had absolutely nothing to do with wrestling. It was hip-hop music, it was R&B music, it was celebrity gossip. It was like your TMZ plus your Complex, pretty much. And I did it for 2 years, and then at some point I realized that I was graduating soon, and what was I going to do with this? I felt like I had built up this radio show past what it should have been, and I was kind of like stuck. I didn't know where else to go. I knew I wanted to do a podcast, and I knew I wanted to do a website, and
here we are.
Well, I wanted to stick with my brand, and I stopped doing it in September, and then we came up with this idea in November. And I don't know, I always felt like there was just a void there after I stopped the Lowdown. It just felt like I wanted to do something else. Like, it just felt like I wasn't doing enough. I don't know why I felt like that, but that's my spiel.
So my background is a little bit different. I started off in broadcast journalism my freshman year, and now in my senior year, I'm actually doing print, marketing, social media stuff. I write for a newspaper right now, and I also work in PR. So that's a little bit about me and my background. But between the two of us, we have a lot of different skills that we can utilize in wrestling Winedown. And it's a great experience for us talking about something that we love and learning new skills while we're at it and meeting new people.
Yes. Thank you for listening to another episode of Wrestling Winedown. You can find us and you can subscribe to us and like all of our episodes on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, and wherever else you listen to your podcast at. Get your listening on.
We also want to hear from you guys. You can find us at Twitter and Instagram at WWDcast. That is WWDCAST.
Until next time, enjoy your wine and, of course, enjoy your wrestling. Cheers!